This happened around 2011 when I was renting an apartment with a friend. It was a typical 2-bedroom apartment in an old 5-story building. My friend's name was Vika. Sometimes her father stayed overnight in her room because he worked night shifts. I lived there alone most of the time. Since her room was bigger, she took the living room, and I moved into the smaller bedroom. The neighborhood was actually very nice, quiet, respectable. Most of the neighbors were elderly people. Sometimes in the evenings they even gathered outside the building and danced to accordion music. Oddly enough, it never bothered anyone. In general, it was just a normal building. We lived there for about a year, and nothing strange ever happened. No strange noises, no uneasy atmosphere. Except for one incident. The apartment had almost no furniture. I didn't bother buying anything because I wasn't sure how long I would stay. The landlady was moody and sometimes complained about the smallest things. So in my room, I only had a clothes rack, an inflatable mattress, and that was it. The mattress was placed under the window near the radiator. In winter, it was warmer there, and in summer it stayed cool. There was a thin, transparent curtain on the window, and outside there was a street lamp. Because of that, the room was always faintly lit at night. But it never bothered me. One winter night I woke up suddenly, for no reason. I just opened my eyes and lay there for a few minutes looking at the radiator. The apartment was quiet, only the ticking of a clock, and occasionally the sound of cars passing outside. Finally, I decided to get up and go to the bathroom. I turned toward the room and froze. Right beside my mattress, squatting on the floor, was a woman. I still remember exactly what she looked like. Bleached yellow hair with dark roots just below her shoulders. Brown eyes, a red turtleneck sweater, a denim jacket and jeans. She looked completely solid, completely real. She was just sitting there, staring at me, and I was staring back. Several long seconds passed. Finally, I asked the most logical question I could think of. "Who are you?" Honestly, it probably would have made more sense to scream and run out of the apartment. But strangely, I wasn't scared. For some reason, I had completely forgotten that I was alone in the apartment. Vika was visiting her parents at the time. The woman never answered my question. Instead, she started smiling, slowly, very slowly stretching her lips, like something out of a cheap horror movie. And then I saw her mouth. She had no teeth, none at all. In the dim light, it looked like a black hole in the middle of her pale face. And then I did something even stranger. I simply stood up on the mattress and turned toward the window, with my back to her. And I started thinking, how could anyone even be inside the apartment? The door was locked. The windows were closed. I'm a very light sleeper. I would have heard someone come in. And the floor in my room creaked terribly, even under the weight of a child. Under an adult, it would have been unbelievably loud. My head filled with questions, but still no fear. Until suddenly I remembered something. I was alone in the apartment. That was when panic hit me. My heart dropped into my stomach. My hands felt weak. I wanted to scream. All those emotions flooded in within seconds. I spun around. The room was empty, completely empty. Just the clothes rack, the mattress, and me. No footsteps, no creaking, no door sounds, nothing. She vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. It was around 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat in the kitchen listening to every sound in the apartment and thinking about only one question. Who was she? Yekretak. My parents never used that name to scare me. My friends never told stories about it. I had never heard the word before. And yet, somehow, I knew that was the name of the thing that lived in my room. A word that doesn't exist in any language. A word that made my heart skip a beat every time it crossed my mind, and brought tears to my eyes for reasons I could never explain. I never actually saw it, but I knew exactly what it looked like. Slightly taller than a child, dark skin, almost black, and human eyes. Every evening I tried to delay the moment when I had to return to my room. Sometimes I stayed outside until it was late. Sometimes I helped my mother with laundry. Sometimes I simply hid in other rooms of the house. The only proof that Yekretak existed were thin scratches on the wallpaper. Once my father tried to scold me for them, but I pointed out that the scratches were almost at the ceiling, far higher than I could ever reach. Every night I wrapped myself tightly in my blanket and listened. I listened to it breathing. It sounded like the way dogs breathe. I could listen to that sound until morning. Sometimes I even fell asleep while it was still there. Whenever I had the chance, I ran into my parents' bedroom. Sometimes they sent me back. Sometimes they let me stay. But one night, Yekretak touched my hand. Cold, sticky. In that moment, I suddenly realized that I might die right there. It was a horrible feeling. And the worst part was that somehow I both knew and had absolutely no idea how it was going to happen. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped up and ran to my parents' room. I grabbed the doorknob, locked. So I ran to the storage closet. My legs barely worked. I kept stumbling as I ran. I threw the closet door open, fell inside and slammed it shut. I crawled into the farthest corner, trying not even to breathe. And then, from somewhere beside me, near a pile of old rags, I heard a voice. Raspy, unclear. Symptoms: auditory hallucinations, delusional thinking, paranoia. Diagnosis: treatment-resistant schizophrenia. Please write that down. Write it down, ladies and gentlemen. It took me a long time to even say this out loud, because if I tell the whole story, it sounds like I'm either lying or losing my mind. But ever since I heard that train again, staying silent has gotten harder. Back then, I was working up north. Nothing special, just a rotation job, a small station at the edge of nowhere. Beyond it, only forest, swamps, and snow that never really melts, even in summer. Trains didn't come through often. If you saw lights, it meant someone was leaving for a long time, or coming back, not entirely by choice. That night, I was on duty, around 4 a.m, the kind of silence where you can hear your tea cooling in the mug, and then a horn. Not sharp, not alarming, just long and low. The problem was, there were no trains scheduled, no passenger trains, no freight. I checked the log, looked at the clock. You'd think you just made a mistake too, right? At first I thought I imagined it. Happens out there. Wind, echoes, a tired mind. But then the light inside the station flickered, slowly, like someone was covering the lamp with their hand. The train was moving, slowly, too slowly. I stepped out onto the platform. The cold bit into my face, even though it was August. The headlights were dim, like they were shining through dirty glass. The locomotive was old, the kind I'd only seen in black and white photos in the break room, from decades ago. It stopped right in front of me. The doors didn't open. No one stepped out. No one waved from the windows. I just stood there thinking, if a voice comes over the intercom right now, will I even turn around? No voice came, but inside one of the cars, a light slowly turned on. There were people inside, not many, 6, maybe 7. They were sitting perfectly still, facing the windows, looking straight at me. I took a step back, then another, and right then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from dispatch. "Who are you meeting out there?" I didn't even reply. I looked up. The light inside the car went out. The train jerked and started moving again, toward the forest, where the tracks haven't been used in years. The horn sounded once more, quieter, like it was already far away. In the morning, I checked everything. No records, no entries. The station cameras were down for maintenance, just for that night. My co-workers brushed it off, said it was the north, fatigue, nerves. Only one old track worker looked at me closely and asked, "Who was in the windows?" "People," I said. He nodded slowly. "Then you got lucky." He didn't explain anything else. A week later, I started digging through old records. I found a report, a train that disappeared on that same stretch of track back in the late 80s. There was no accident. It just went into the night and never arrived. Officially, it was an empty train, but rumors said there were people on board. After my shift rotation ended, I left, changed jobs, moved to the city. I almost convinced myself it was all just a strange dream. Almost. Because a month ago, I was standing on a regular platform, this time outside Boston. Evening, street lights, people all around, and then that same horn, low, drawn out, that same slow train. I didn't turn around. Honestly, I couldn't. And when the train passed by, my phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. "You still on duty?" I still don't understand what it was, but sometimes at night it feels like if I step out onto the balcony and listen closely, somewhere far away, beyond the houses and the trees, the rails will start creaking again. My neighbor is one of those annoying wannabe YouTube personalities. Over the years, I've seen him cough out cinnamon, lay flat on the hood of his car as it slowly creeps down the driveway, and douse himself in lukewarm water, all the while screaming epic win, epic fail, or fuck, epic maintenance of the status quo for all I know. It can get tiring to watch him go about his shenanigans in the pursuit of viral fame. So when he knocked on my door the other day, told me he was going away for a few weeks, and asked that I get his mail, honestly, it was a relief. I can't explain the peace of mind I had knowing I didn't have to brace myself for any of his stupidity for a while. I was always afraid his stunts would wind up bleeding over into my life. Things were pretty normal for the first couple of days. He received a few bills, a bit of spam, and what I could only assume was a birthday card. Then, one evening, I got home to find a cardboard box waiting on his front porch. In big red letters was written, "Return to sender." I'm no small fry, but I admit I had trouble lifting the box on my own. It was really freaking heavy. Lugging it across the road to my house was even harder, and I quickly realized there was no way I was going to drag it up the stairs and through my front door. I decided I'd leave his package in my garage. It wasn't like I kept my car in there. The garage door was a piece of shit that refused to open without a good thug and a whack. It was less trouble just leaving the car in the driveway than than it was to fight with the garage door every morning and night. In hindsight, I should have set the package down while I struggled to open the tricky door. But you know how it is when you've got a good grip on something. No point in setting it down if you don't have to. It was as I kicked the door for a third time that I lost my grip on the package, and it fell to the ground. I heard a light crack inside. "Shit," I cursed. I hoped I hadn't broken anything important, but figured I just wouldn't tell my neighbor about it and let him assume the break happened en route. Hands free, I finally managed to get the garage door unstuck, and boy did it screech in protest as it rolled up and over me. I dragged the box the rest of the way, setting it in the corner for whenever my neighbor would come back to claim it. And then I forgot all about it, until a few days passed, that is. I'm not sure exactly how long it took for the smell to waft in from the crack under the garage to house door, but it came in slow progression. It was a sickly sweet odor similar to a skunk, and for the first few days after I smelled it, I genuinely assumed that's exactly what it was. Roadkill that had left its mark on my house. It was only when I realized the scent was growing more intense instead of fading that I went looking for a source. That's when I opened the garage door, and that's when the odor knocked me back, holding my nose. The culprit wasn't hard to identify. The only change in my garage was the box in the corner. I remember thinking it must have been one of those meat of the month subscription boxes. The meat must have gone rancid from being left out of the fridge for so long. How much meat could have been in there for the box to have been so large and heavy? An entire freaking cow. I covered my nose as I approached the box, a pair of scissors in my hands. I probably wouldn't have needed them to open it, as it had become soggy enough at the bottom to poke through with a finger. But I wasn't about to poke my finger into spoiled meat juices. That soggy bottom was the reason I had to open the box in the first place. If I tried to drag it out whole, everything would spill onto the floor. I was going to have to dump the pieces of meat one garbage bag at a time and take them down to the dumpster, a process I wasn't looking forward to. My scissors tore through the tape along the top of the cardboard box. I thought the smell couldn't get any worse, but as I flipped the flaps open, I discovered a whole new gamut of stink. It was like opening a burning oven, but instead of a heat wave, I was met with waves of piss, sweat, shit, and putrefaction. It was so bad that I staggered back and had to force down the puke, begging to guzzle out of me. I don't think I could have handled that scent mingling with the horrors coming out of the box. I'm not ashamed to admit I ran out the door for a breath of fresh air, but in the short time I'd spent in the garage, the smell had become so ingrained in the fabric of my clothes that it clung to me like a shadow. Nothing I tried could keep the smell out of my nostrils. Not air fresheners, not a face mask, not 3 showers and a change of clothes. Every second that box lay open in my garage was another second the smell was allowed a foothold into my home. I had to bite the bullet. I returned to the garage, the flaps of the box still open as though inviting me to look. I was prepared, a clothespin pinning my nostrils shut, a garbage bag in one hand, the strongest cleaner I could find in the other, and long rubber gloves to keep my skin from having to touch what was inside. But, as it turns out, I needed none of those things. I wouldn't have to touch or clean the contents of that box. I would only have to suffer the nightmares every night. You see, there was meat in that box, but it didn't come from a cow or a pig. No, it was worse than that. It was my neighbor, dead, still in one piece but dead. I called the cops, and naturally, they took me in for interrogation. It's kind of hard not to suspect the man with a corpse in his garage after all. Thankfully, they soon realized I wasn't involved. My DNA might have been all over that box. The smell might have left the mark throughout my house. But there was one piece of irrefutable evidence in my neighbor's own hands that proved my innocence. A vlogging camera. They showed me the footage only once. I'm not sure if they were allowed to, or if they felt so bad for me, they figured it couldn't hurt. Either way, I saw it. My neighbor was sitting in the box outside of a shipping facility, laughing as he told the world how he was going to mail himself across state lines. He'd brought pee bottles, food, a pillow, and a few flashlights. His friend, a guy I'd seen at his place several times to help with his stunts, closed the lid and presumably dropped him off for shipment. Throughout the next couple of hours, or days, I'm honestly not sure, my neighbor recorded a few short clips about his progress. I think I'm in a truck now. I can feel it moving. Must be in a warehouse. Pretty warm here. Still got plenty of food. That kind of stuff. And then, on the last entry, the box toppled over. He broke his neck, and that was it. The camera recorded until either the memory card got too full or the battery died. There's one thing I didn't tell the police after they showed me the video. One thing I heard in the footage that will haunt me to the day I die. Just after the tumble that broke his neck, I heard the familiar screeching sound of my garage door. It was the same sound I'd heard years ago when I first got the house. That metallic, grinding shriek that made your skin crawl. I could still picture the way the garage door rolled, the chain rattling, the motor straining against some invisible weight. I know that sound now, intimately, and I know what it means. It wasn't just the box that had fallen. Something else had moved in my garage at the same exact time. Something alive in the dark, waiting. Even now, I don't shut my garage door all the way, and I always leave a light on. I never forget that sound. I never forget what I saw. I never forget the way that smell settled into my clothes, my hair, my skin, and the way the air seemed to thicken in response, like it knew what was coming next. I don't know if anyone will believe me. Hell, I barely believe myself sometimes. But I know the truth. There are things living in the shadows of this world, things that are patient and waiting, and they don't care about your life. They only care that you notice them before it's too late. And the garage, my garage, has never felt empty again. A few years ago, I worked as a guide and administrator at a historic prison. More precisely, a prison museum in the United States. It was one of the oldest buildings in the city, and it was extremely popular among ghost hunters, so working there always felt a little unsettling. The early years of the prison were quite brutal. Several deaths happened there, including executions carried out under orders from the authorities. Because of that, many ghost stories began to circulate about the place. Even though I personally witnessed a number of strange things during my time working there. The building itself was extremely old. It was a shelter for local wildlife, and it certainly wasn't protected from the wind. Because of that, any supernatural story had to be taken with a fair amount of skepticism. We also had dozens of mannequins placed around the complex. Some stood in the yard, some in the cells, and others in the hallways, recreating traditional prison scenes. It was always funny to hear tourists gasp when they suddenly noticed the first mannequin figure standing in the dim corridor. But there is one incident I still remember very clearly, because the town relied heavily on tourism. The winter months were extremely quiet. Sometimes I could go for hours without seeing another person. One day, I was lucky enough to get a shift where I had to close the museum late at night and open it again early the next morning. Both closing and opening required a flashlight because during that time of year, the darkness outside was almost complete and lighting had never been installed throughout the entire complex. That day, I had only one visitor. To fight the boredom, I decided to take one of the spare mannequins from storage. I dressed it in the clothing of one of the early female convicts and placed it in the kitchen of the women's wing. I turned it so its back faced the door, put a bowl in one hand and a whisk for beating eggs in the other. It looked as if the woman was standing there cooking. I made sure everything was secured tightly and locked the kitchen for the night. The next morning, I arrived around 6 o'clock to open the museum. As I walked through the dark corridors of the complex with a flashlight, I suddenly heard a strange sound. The room I was standing in shared a wall with the kitchen, and from the other side came a scraping noise. I stopped and listened. The sound would stop, then start again, sometimes growing louder and accompanied by knocking. To be honest, it made me uneasy. I continued my inspection of the building. The complex was circular, with rooms arranged inside, so I slowly moved along the corridor toward the kitchen. When I reached the door, the sound was very clear. It was irregular, like something was moving and bumping into objects. I decided to look inside first through the small sliding hatch, and that was when I saw it. The mannequin was moving, not just slightly. It was clearly tapping its foot up and down, slowly turning the whisk, raising and lowering its arm. I stood there in the darkness watching. When my eyes adjusted to the dim light, my brain finally started processing what I was seeing, whether it was possession, a poltergeist, or something else. I definitely wasn't going to stay long enough to find out. I slammed the hatch shut and ran back the way I came. I didn't stop until I reached the main office, where I immediately bolted the door and turned on every light I could find. Around 10 in the morning, the first tourist arrived. By that time, I had already convinced myself that what I had seen earlier must have been some kind of hallucination. Maybe I had simply heard the old building settling, and the rest had been my imagination filling in the gaps. But the kitchen was still part of the tour route. So I hung a "back in 5 minutes" sign at the reception desk and quietly made my way back to the kitchen door. I slowly opened the hatch and looked inside. The mannequin stood exactly where I had left it, completely still. I let out a deep sigh of relief and opened the door, and the very second I did, the mannequin started whisking eggs. The arm moved up and down, the whisk spun, and the foot desperately tapped against the floor. In that moment, I felt real terror. This was happening in daylight, right in front of my eyes. I was alone in the prison, with a possessed mannequin, and the next tourist was supposed to walk through this exact room. What the hell was I supposed to do? I remember thinking, it's just plaster and papier-mâché. Just destroy it, smash it quickly and run. I grabbed a meat tenderizer and very cautiously approached the creature. As I moved closer, the mannequin moved faster. When I was within arm's reach, I grabbed its arm, and at that moment there was a horrible, raspy hissing sound. I looked into the bowl. A large king lizard, about 16 inches long, was staring back at me. Its head was tightly stuck between the wires of the whisk, and it was desperately trying to escape. I released the mannequin's arm, and the lizard ran. Trapped in the bowl, it spun around on the bottom, turning the whisk attached to the mannequin's hand. That caused the arm to move up and down, and the entire structure vibrated, making the mannequin's foot knock against the floor. 5 minutes later, I released the poor thing into the yard, still hysterically laughing. By the end of the day, the mannequin was carefully packed up and sent back into storage, just in case. In short, a terrifying mannequin powered by a lizard.